Hi, and welcome to Matrix Moments. I'm Rajinder Balaraman and a director at Matrix Partners India. Today's episode is special as it covers our former colleague Ashish Mopatra's journey of building OfBusiness. OfBusiness is an innovative SME financing platform that solves for SMEs' needs around purchase finance, raw material fulfillment, and new opportunity discovery. They now have over 1,250 crores assets under management, growing 100% year on year while generating 4.5% pre-tax ROA. Joining Ashish on this podcast is Vikram Vaidyanathan, Managing Director at Matrix Partners India, who led this investment. Ashish and Vikram have known each other for 15 years, starting with McKinsey, then Matrix, and now OfBusiness. They share a fantastic camaraderie, and I hope you see some of that through this episode. Tune in to learn more.
Hi everyone, it's my great pleasure to welcome Ashish Mohapatra to this podcast. He's a friend, colleague, a founder of one of our highest growth companies, and I have the privilege of being on his board. I'm going to quickly introduce him. He's come from humble beginnings in Orissa, which he keeps reminding me, and went on to IIT Kharagpur, then ITC, and graduated from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad ISB, and ended up at McKinsey, which is the first time that Ashish and I met. And it's been a professional friendship that's now going on 14 years. Both of us left within days of each other to join Matrix, and Ashish led our healthcare practice at Matrix Partners, and at one point of time decided to become an entrepreneur. And we, of course, invested in him and were very lucky to back him at that stage, not knowing what he was going to do. But it's ended up being a fantastic journey at OfBusiness. And the reason that I actually gave you this background and gave you all the places that he has been at is that he has owned the network at all these places that he's been at, whether it's IIT Kharagpur or ITC or McKinsey or ISB. And all of those networks have culminated in his team at OfBusiness. So it's wonderful to see that journey. Welcome. I'm going to start with the investor to entrepreneur journey, and lots of people who are investors, and me included at some point in time, think they can be entrepreneurs. And I've always told you that at that point of time, I used to tell you you'll make a better entrepreneur than an investor. And now I can say with certainty that you're a fantastic entrepreneur. Forget investing and so on. So, how did you think about that transition? And talk a little bit about what differentiates entrepreneurs and investors, and which investors do you think can become entrepreneurs?
Okay, firstly, thank you for having me on this edition. It's my second installment of Matrix Moments. I thoroughly enjoyed the first one with Avnish and look forward to this one as well. Just to conclude, because you made that remark, while I've been a friend and colleague to you, I think Vikram has been a great rival as well as a critique to me, and has helped me in my professional and I would say entrepreneurial growth across my last two stints, and our association goes to more than 10 years. So privileged to be talking to you. I think the key difference between an investor and an entrepreneur is what they enjoy doing. I think an entrepreneur is a guy who wants to get things done, who enjoys every single moment of celebration or grief, whereas an investor is one who's probably hooked on to a very long drawn outcome and is okay not doing it himself. So I was always one who enjoyed doing. I was always very operational, very hands-on. I always wanted to be in, as they call, in the dirt, in the filth, and I enjoyed being there. I enjoyed rolling up my sleeves, and I think that is a key element of what differentiates an entrepreneur from an investor.
Yeah, I think it's also conviction, greater conviction behind your own ideas and your own self. And I truly do think that's one of the reasons why, for me, I always say that I'll probably make a better investor today. I'm a reasonable investor than an entrepreneur, because you have to have extraordinary conviction and positivity and optimism about your own idea, and honestly block out everything that the world is telling you. And the world is usually telling you that your idea is a bad idea, whereas investors are inherently much more cynical and more objective and more rational than entrepreneurs are. And I truly think great entrepreneurs have this irrational conviction about their ideas. And I think that does separate you from others.
Agree to that. I will give you a more vulnerable side of it. I think in my professional and academic journey, I as an individual had never really aced it. I had always dented a hole, but never maybe created a crater. And that burning desire to actually, create that big hole in the universe, which I'll be known for, is something that made me move. I think I was a good investor, not a great one. I was a good consultant, not a great one. I think just the fact it all piled up within me that I'm probably made up for different things, which I'm sure everybody feels at some point in life in time, is what made me do the shift as well.
So let's talk about the early days. I remember we invested in something which was more call it health centric, because that's where the healthcare experience was coming into play. That quickly moved into a B2B commerce company, and the B2B commerce company was off to a very fast start, and it had grown. I think it had grown to hundreds of crores very quickly in terms of GMV, and it had some reasonable margins. I forgot what the margin was, 3-4% type margin, maybe a little bit more. But I remember calling you or you calling me one night and saying I can't sleep, and you kept trying to figure out what is the real business within this, and it ended up being a fintech business. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. But talk through the early journey. Great start, and usually when people are off to a great start, they keep doing what they're doing, versus you were questioning if that was a real company and that was a real business.
Yeah. So we started sometime around February 2016. Our first operation started around February. And in about 3 to 4 months, we were clocking a GMV of easily close to between 15 to 20 crores a month. And we were NCM 3 positive and burning as little as anywhere between 50 to 60 lakhs of cash at the corporate level in a company in a month. Right. So
And
clearly,
NCM for our listeners, NCM 3 is net contribution margin 3.
yeah, net contribution margin 3, wherein you just have the corporate salaries to be taken out. And
Yeah.
NCM 3, we were well in addition of about 30 to 40 lakhs a month, which for a 3 to 4 month old company was a great start. I remember a lot of people coming and telling me as friends, as investors and stuff like that, that we are probably the highest GMB company in a quarter. I realized though back then that there is something amiss, because fundamentally I have always believed in my life that the biggest differentiator that a company can have, or the biggest calling card that a company can have, is profitability. And I believe that the profitability, while we were in a great march towards that, the reality is the health of that profit is under question, because every commerce company, once it attains scale, essentially has to solve for financing, because B2B commerce companies fundamentally have a credit term involved. The business is not done in advance. So to do a financing transaction, you need to have different capabilities. And the capabilities are around debt raising, because debt is cheaper than equity by a distance, around underwriting, under collections. And those are capabilities we were not investing in while we were building in a commerce company. But fundamentally, those capabilities were required for us to scale profitability. Right? You could easily build an unprofitable company unless you care about these three capabilities. So if these three capabilities were required, I fundamentally thought that those are capabilities that we need to invest in internally. Now, if I take a customer view, I also realized that most of the people were buying from us, not because we were cheaper or we were faster, but they were buying from us because our credit terms were better. Just to give you a sense, if we were offering a 7-day credit term versus a 90-day credit term, the deal conversion was far easier. And it gave me the clear sense that the customers are coming to me because of a financing problem, and the capabilities that I had invested in during my first 3 to 4 months of the journey were not ones which were attuned towards financing. And that's when I realized that this is something that is not going to scale to to that crater that I was talking about. This will probably end up being a dent and a hole again. So in 3 to 4 months, at the peak of our performance, with the team at the peak of its euphoria, in about June 2016, we realized we had to change. It was an arduous journey after that, but we had to change, because otherwise we would have again ended up being a hole and not a crater.
No, I still remember that conversation very clearly, and both of us were new parents at that time, and both of us had to step outside our homes to have conversations with each other because we had babies at home. And I remember walking down around my house, and you had said credit terms and collections. Because I asked you, what is the core that makes the company tick? And you had said we can collect money from anyone. We can just go and I remember you were staying up at night because you had so much to collect the next day, and you were like, this is not making sense. I have so much money to collect from the market, and people are buying because of the credit terms. And at that point of time, everything I was investing in was financial services and fintech, and I said, hey, this is actually a financial services company, not a commerce company. And I remember you saying, I don't know anything about financial services. I don't know anything about fintech. You're saying that this is a financial services company. I don't know anything about it. How can I make a financial services company? And from there, you've built a outstanding fintech, early fintech and financial services company. So talk a little bit about that journey, both personally for you and how you converted a very young organization into a fintech which is highly focused on risk, understands how the balance sheet works, understands how important collections is. First, talk a little bit about your own journey where you had to shift that mindset to say, you know what, I'll make money on financing margin much more so than anything else. And then how did you gear the institution towards it?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally 4 skills are required to build a large financial services company. I think technology is a necessary condition. So let's not call ourselves fintech because all fin services have to be fintech. So fundamentally those 4 capabilities on the ground are the following. You need to have a great sales force. Now it could be automated, it could be driven by technology, it could be helped by technology, but you need to have a great sales mindset because finally you need a customer who you need to acquire. Second is you need to have the ability to actually study the risk in a way that it is a great correlation to what he does as his real business. So you have to estimate his current financial condition to the best way possible, which is risk. The third is around raising debt, because fundamentally the business is about creating a leverage. So if you're building an equity-led financing business, then you are going to be hard spent in a very short term. And the fourth thing is around collections, wherein, because it is a business wherein you have to get money out, whether it is through your own efforts, through outsourced efforts, through your business model, or whatever it is. Those are the 4 things. I think first, realizing that these are the 4 capabilities that need to be invested in as an organization as well as an entrepreneur is the starting point. And many people forget that all of these 4 are important to begin with in the very beginning itself. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that you as an individual or even as a founding team will not have all of these 4. You need to build these capabilities across the organization. For example, when we started off, liabilities fundamentally was easy for us because the CFO of our company, Ruchi, who happens to be my way better half in life, she was actually very adept and already had the network into banks and NBFCs. So that was ticked out. I was a great sales guy. I was hungry. I could sell fridge to an Eskimo. So that was ticked out. So there were 2 things that remained. One was collections, and the second was around underwriting. So we believe that underwriting is a specific technical skill. So that capability, we actually built it from outside. We hired people as very senior members in the team who actually built out the initial structure while we learned. And the 4th thing is around collections. To me, that was a DNA problem. It was to be solved through the DNA of the organization. And hence, I built systems around it. I built a culture that was always hungry to collect the next penny that was due. Now, how did I make that journey? So for me, there were 2 things to be learned. One was around collections. I never bothered about liability. And the second thing was around underwriting. It was just pure hard work, pure perseverance. I promised to myself that I'm going to read through at least 3 balance sheets a day for the next 3 months. I'm going to talk to as many people and just listen, read, persevere at it, just be at it. And I think I developed that capability wherein I understood it theoretically. Then I started underwriting myself for the first 9 months. I was actually doing underwriting on my own. I used to go for cases on my own, and I understood as the cases actually behaved as to what we were doing and what is more real. On collections, I think we have had it relatively easier because we built a culture that has been very, very successful. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the later part of the podcast. But that's how I solved my thing. That hey, there are
Yeah.
these 4 elements. I'm responsible for a few. Others are to be built out, and they have to be built. Now, how do we get the organization aligned? Now, that's a separate question. For that, I think people at the top have to start it. People have to at the top have to speak the exact same language as what I did to you right now, which is they have to say these 4 elements are important. One is not more important than the other. Everything has to be invested in. You can't do everything yourself. So please respect other people who actually bring in those capabilities. So it starts there. Second, you have to force people to consciously actually develop a risk mindset, which not many of us do, because fundamentally we are empiristic in nature, and we want to be imperial in the way we build our businesses, and hence it has to be drilled down slowly, steadily, patiently with people who actually come in with that kind of a mindset. But when they see that seniors around them are doing that, business outcome is dependent on that, slowly and steadily they'll change. It's a slow process. It needs you to be at it. It needs you to persevere.
I think the 2, 3 things that you said, and I just want to call them out. One is the vocabulary of the organization. And I think the vocabulary of the organization changed, I wouldn't say overnight, but changed very quickly from being a commerce centric vocabulary, which was talking about GMV, which was talking about margins and CM, to suddenly talking about yield, collections, NPA very, very quickly. And I remember initially when I was we were trying to architect the business model, and I remember putting these words on the board where it was, it was yield, NIM, ROA, NPA, and you were like, okay, what is all this? And I remember the last board meeting, you were educating me about ECL and how the ECL methodology for business is very different from everyone else, and you truly grown through that journey. And for the non-fintech guys, ECL is expected credit loss, where systemically important NBFCs are need to move to that kind of methodology. The other thing I would call out for young entrepreneurs who are trying to make this transition sometimes from a commerce company to a fintech company, because everybody thinks there is a fintech in their company, is that when I looked at Ashish's journey, he was highly customer centric. He would know exactly how that the customer's business works, and even today, he would know names of most of the customers, where they are, which tier 3, tier 4 town they are in, and architected his entire financing business to the pulse of that customer. And I think that's what actually helped you make that transition, where you still focused on that customer, and it was customer centric, and then you architected this business model just based on the customer. And whenever there's a new product or there is a new geography, I see that you as well as the entire organization goes towards that customer and client that you guys are serving.
So I will tell you something that I realized very quickly into a journey. I would say in the first 2 quarters or so, that being customer centric is good. It's necessary, but it is never sufficient. You cannot stand on your ground unless you are customer centric. Being customer centric is never a differentiator. It's a necessary condition. You obviously have to build it for your customer. If you can't do that, then you don't need to exist. And the reality is, it is something that will not make you profitable. It will not make you grow. It will not make you a sustainable differentiation. It is just a basic necessary condition. Everybody does that. All good organizations do that. So that's number one. Number two, I hear a lot of people talking about technologically led. We are technology led. We are algorithm led. Again, that is a pure basic necessary condition. You need to have technology in your businesses, because without that you won't have access or low cost access. And without that you cannot have efficiency in your processes so that you can cut cost. The question comes that having been customer centric, having been technology led, how do you build a business model after that? Because in India, first thing that you need to be is that you need to be very cost efficient for a customer. So the customer is not going to pay you a premium like it does in developed countries, right? Yeah. So within that, how do you manage and how do you build a business that is profitable, that at the end of the day delivers a return on equity which is attractive to both you and other investors, is something that you have to think about. According to me, if you spend too much time about customer centricity and all that, you've not solved the problem in your head. That is something that you have to start off before you build a business. The promoter's basic basic, I would say, responsibility towards the organization is to build profitability. It is to build a business model that delivers returns. I think customer centricity, technology, innovation are very, very abused because, according to me, everybody has some of that and they need that to exist.
Thanks for tuning in. For more Matrix Moments episodes, you can head to www.matrixpartners.in/blog. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more updates.